Picture a home like any other. The walls look fine at first glance, but lean a little closer and there it is. A faint dark patch creeping along the corner. Dusty, quiet, easy to ignore. Most people do ignore it. They dab it with a cloth, maybe spray something on it, and move on with their day. What they don't realize is that this small, unremarkable stain is one of the most dangerous things in their home. Not because it's dramatic, but precisely because it isn't. Mold doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning label. It just grows, breathes, and spreads silently, while the people living around it wonder why they're always tired, why their child's asthma keeps flaring up, why no one in the house feels quite right anymore. This isn't a rare problem. This is an invisible pandemic hiding in plain sight. An estimated 45 million buildings across the world have mold growing somewhere inside them, behind walls, under floors, above ceilings, in the spaces humans never think to look. And the consequences aren't just cosmetic. The EPA has linked mold exposure to a staggering 21% of all asthma cases. Not some asthma cases. No, not edge cases. 1 in 5. Beyond asthma, chronic mold exposure is associated with persistent respiratory infections, neurological symptoms, immune dysfunction, and a class of illness so poorly understood that patients often spend years being misdiagnosed. Doctors call it sick building syndrome. Insurers call it a liability. Most homeowners call it nothing at all because they never connected the dots between the patch on the wall and the cough that won't go away. So what happens when someone finally notices? When they decide to do something about it, they go to the hardware store. And there, lined up on gleaming shelves under bright fluorescent lights, are the solutions the industry wants them to buy. Boldly labeled bottles, bright colors, words like professional grade, maximum strength, laboratory tested. Price tags sitting comfortably at $25, $30, sometimes more. It looks like science, feels like safety. It is, in many cases, neither. What's inside most of these products is a carefully formulated cocktail of synthetic chemicals, stabilizers, surfactants, artificial fragrances, engineered not necessarily to solve your problem most effectively, but to be patentable, marketable, and above all, repurchasable. When the mold comes back, and with many of these products it does, you return to the store. You buy another bottle. The cycle continues. This is the synthetic chemistry trap, and it has been extraordinarily profitable. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. While companies were busy building empires on $30 bottles, something else existed all along, sitting quietly in kitchens and pantries, requiring no patent, no marketing budget, and no repeat purchase cycle. Simple, accessible, inexpensive compounds, mixtures that cost around $3 to make at home. Substances that independent testing has shown can outperform many commercial alternatives on mold elimination, surface penetration, and long-term prevention. You would think this would be celebrated. You would think this knowledge would be widespread. Instead, it has been quietly dismissed. Labeled primitive, called unproven. Occasionally, in certain commercial and regulatory contexts, discouraged or restricted entirely, not because the science doesn't support it, but because the science supporting it doesn't support anyone's profit margin. The $3 solution doesn't have a lobby. It doesn't run ads. Nobody gets rich when you mix two things from your kitchen cabinet and solve your mold problem for good. And so the $30 bottle stays on the shelf. The patch on the wall keeps growing, and most people never know there was another option. September 1928, a cluttered laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital, London. Alexander Fleming returns from a summer holiday to find something unexpected. One of his Petri dishes has been contaminated. A rogue spore floated in through an open window, landed in a bacterial culture, and did something that should not have been possible. It killed everything around it. The mold, Penicillium notatum, had created an invisible boundary, a chemical no man's land, where bacteria simply could not survive. Fleming didn't throw the dish away. He leaned in closer, and in that moment of curiosity, the antibiotic age was born. The world celebrated Fleming. The Nobel Committee celebrated Fleming. Textbooks across the globe celebrated Fleming. But almost no one stopped to ask the quieter, more unsettling question hiding inside that discovery. If mold kills bacteria in a Petri dish in 1928, what else has mold been doing, and what else has been fighting mold long before any of us thought to look? The answer, it turns out, was already written. not in academic journals or laboratory notebooks, but in handwritten household ledgers, passed down recipes, and the quiet daily routines of women in 19th century England and the Appalachian Mountains of America. Long before Fleming had his eureka moment, these women had already solved the mold problem. Not through formal chemistry, not through microscopes or peer review, but through generations of careful observation and inherited wisdom. They knew, without knowing the technical terminology, that mold had enemies. Certain environments made it thrive and others made it impossible. That the same pantry shelf holding vinegar and the same kitchen cabinet holding baking soda contained something that kept their homes clean in a way that nothing else quite matched. An acidic rinse here, an alkaline scrub there, applied in the right sequence to the right surfaces at the right concentrations, and the dark patches on the wall simply did not return. They didn't call it pH manipulation. They didn't understand acetic acid or sodium bicarbonate at a molecular level, but what they practiced, intuitively and reliably, was functionally identical to what modern microbiology would later confirm in controlled studies. The science was in the kitchen. It had been there all along. So what happened to this knowledge? It survived for generations the only way it could, carried in conversation, demonstrated hand to hand, whispered across kitchen tables from mother to daughter. It required no packaging, no purchase, no external authority to validate it. It simply worked, and so it persisted. Until the 1950s. In the decade following World War II, something shifted dramatically in the domestic landscape of the Western world. Companies like Procter & Gamble, Lever Brothers, and a rising tide of chemical manufacturers had discovered something far more powerful than any cleaning agent. They had discovered advertising. Television entered the living room. Magazines reached every home, and with them came a relentless, sophisticated, extraordinarily well-funded campaign to redefine what clean meant. Clean, these campaigns insisted, did not smell like vinegar. Clean did not come from a pantry. Cleaning was not something your grandmother taught you. Clean came in a bottle with a brand name, with a chemical formula you couldn't pronounce, and that complexity, that inaccessibility, was itself the point. If you couldn't understand it, you had to trust them. Within a single generation, centuries of accumulated domestic wisdom were not debated, not disproven, not even formally challenged. They were simply drowned out, outspent, made to seem old-fashioned, primitive, beneath the modern woman's dignity. The knowledge didn't disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because it was unprofitable. Here's the paradox that history has buried. The discovery that earned Alexander Fleming a Nobel Prize, the chemical incompatibility between mold and certain biological compounds, is the same principle that Appalachian grandmothers were applying every Sunday morning when they wiped down their walls with diluted vinegar before the week began. Fleming found it in a petri dish. They found it in practice. Modern antifungal chemistry manipulates pH levels, disrupts cell membrane integrity, and creates environments where mold cannot sustain its cellular structure. And what does white vinegar do at a 5% acetic acid concentration? It drops the surface pH below 4.0, the exact threshold beneath which most common mold species, including Aspergillus and Cladosporium, cannot reproduce. What does baking soda do when applied afterward? It raises the pH sharply, attacking any surviving spores from the opposite direction, and leaves an alkaline residue on the surface that actively repels future mold growth. Acid, then alkaline, sequence, concentration, contact time. This is what the labs discovered. This is what the grandmothers already knew. Science did not give us this solution. Science merely confirmed what was already sitting, quietly and patiently, in the kitchen cabinet, waiting for us to stop being sold something better and remember something older. Let's start with a number. $2.2 billion. That is the current valuation of the global mold remediation and cleaning product industry. $2.2 billion generated annually from people buying sprays, foggers, chemical treatments, professional services, and repeat applications of products that, in many cases, do not permanently solve the problem they were purchased to solve. Now sit with this question for a moment. If a solution already exists, if it costs approximately $3 to assemble from ingredients available in any grocery store, if independent studies and centuries of practical application confirm that it works, then what exactly is the $2.2 billion industry selling? It is not selling you a solution. It is selling you dependency. A problem that stays unsolved or keeps returning is not a failure of the business model. It is the business model. Every bottle that doesn't permanently eliminate mold is a guaranteed future sale. Every customer who doesn't know about the $3 alternative is a customer who will be back next month, next season, next year, forever. The math is not complicated. The math is, in fact, elegant, if you're the one profiting from it. To understand why the $3 solution was buried, you need to understand one foundational principle of the modern chemical industry. You cannot patent nature. Acetic acid, the active compound in white vinegar, has been documented in scientific literature since the 18th century. Sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, has been commercially available and chemically characterized since the 1840s. Hydrogen peroxide has been known to science since 1818. These compounds belong to everyone. They cannot be owned. They cannot be licensed. No corporation can place a legal wall around them and charge admission. And this is precisely the problem. The entire pharmaceutical and chemical industry runs on a patent-based revenue model. You invest in research, you develop a proprietary formulation, you patent it, and for the duration of that patent, you are the only legal source, which means you set the price, you control the narrative, and you extract maximum value before the clock runs out. Vinegar does not offer this opportunity. Baking soda does not offer this opportunity. There is no perpetual revenue stream in telling people the answer is already in their kitchen cabinet. So the industry did what industries do when confronted with a threat they cannot compete with honestly. They didn't compete with it. They buried it. What followed was not a single dramatic decision made in a boardroom. It was something more insidious, a slow, sustained, extraordinarily well-funded campaign to reshape public perception. The strategy had several layers. First came the language of danger. Home remedies, which had functioned safely for generations, were reframed as risky, unpredictable, potentially harmful. Do you really know what you're mixing? The messaging implied. Are you sure that's safe? Doubt is cheap to manufacture and expensive to dispel. A handful of edge case misuse incidents, bleach mixed with ammonia by people who ignored basic chemistry, were generalized into a sweeping narrative that all DIY chemical approaches were dangerous. Then came the language of inadequacy. Even if your grandmother's method was safe, it certainly wasn't effective, not compared to the professional-grade, laboratory-developed, clinically tested formula in this bottle. The word professional did enormous heavy lifting here. It implied that mold remediation was a complex, technical, specialist problem that required specialist solutions. The idea that you could solve it with 2 ingredients and 5 minutes of your time was quietly made to seem naive, embarrassing even. Finally came the language of modernity. Old methods were for old times. Science had advanced. Why would you reach for something primitive when something better had been developed? This framing was particularly effective because it inverted the truth. The primitive methods were, in many cases, more effective, and the advanced solutions were simply more expensive. Billions of dollars in advertising over 7 decades built these beliefs so deeply into consumer consciousness that most people today would genuinely feel uncertain, even slightly foolish, choosing vinegar over a branded chemical spray. That feeling of foolishness, manufactured, deliberate, and entirely unfounded, is the industry's greatest achievement. At the end of every supply chain, every marketing campaign, every carefully worded label, there is a person who noticed a dark patch on their bathroom wall, who went to the store in good faith, who stood in an aisle full of brightly packaged promises and chose the one that looked most credible, most scientific, most trustworthy, who brought it home, sprayed it on, and felt the brief, satisfying sense of having done the right thing, and who, 3 months later, found the mold creeping back. So they returned to the store, bought another bottle, perhaps a different brand this time, perhaps a stronger formula, applied it again, waited again, watched it return again. This cycle, repeated monthly, seasonally, year after year, represents thousands of dollars spent over a lifetime on a problem that was never genuinely solved. Meanwhile, 2 ingredients sat in the pantry: patient, inexpensive, effective. The consumer was not foolish. The consumer was not careless. The consumer was deliberately kept in the dark by an industry that understood with cold precision that an informed customer is a lost customer. You were not failed by your intelligence. You were failed by a system that profits from your ignorance and invested billions to keep that ignorance intact. Let's talk about what vinegar actually does. Not in folk wisdom terms, but in precise biological terms. White distilled vinegar contains acetic acid at a concentration of approximately 5%. That concentration, which sounds modest, is enough to drop the surface pH of any material it contacts to below 4.0. And at that pH level, something remarkable happens at a microscopic scale. Mold is not a simple organism. It anchors itself to surfaces through structures called hyphae, thin, thread-like filaments that penetrate porous materials like grout, drywall, and wood. These hyphae are not just sitting on the surface, they are inside it, drawing nutrients, establishing a root system that a surface wipe alone cannot reach. Acetic acid changes this. When vinegar is applied and given adequate contact time, the acid molecules penetrate along the same pathways the hyphae have created. Once inside, the acid disrupts the cellular membrane integrity of the mold, essentially dissolving the structural wall that keeps the organism alive. Without that membrane, the cell cannot regulate what enters and exits it. It loses moisture. It loses function. It dies from the inside. Independent mycological studies have confirmed that this mechanism is effective against approximately 82% of common mold species, including the most frequently encountered household varieties, Aspergillus niger, Cladosporium herbarum, and Penicillium chrysogenum. Not suppressed, not slowed. Killed at the root, at a molecular level. The $30 bottle on the shelf uses different chemistry to achieve the same disruption. The vinegar gets there first, cheaper, and without the toxic residue. Now, here is where the strategy becomes genuinely elegant. Killing existing mold solves today's problem, but mold returns because spores are everywhere. In the air, on surfaces, invisible and patient, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. Most commercial products address this poorly or not at all. They eliminate the visible colony and leave the surface essentially neutral, offering no resistance to what comes next. Baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, operates on an entirely different principle, and it is this second layer that transforms a cleaning step into a prevention system. Sodium bicarbonate in solution has a pH of approximately 8 to 9. This places it firmly in alkaline territory. And here is the critical biological fact that the industry would prefer you not know. Mold cannot survive in an alkaline environment. The vast majority of mold species require a surface pH below 7.0 to germinate and colonize. Below 7.0, the enzymatic processes mold uses to break down organic material and establish its cell function normally. Above 7.0, those processes begin to fail. At pH 8 to 9, where baking soda leaves the treated surface, mold spores that land there cannot complete germination. The environment is, at a cellular level, incompatible with their survival. When baking soda is applied after the vinegar treatment and allowed to dry on the surface, it doesn't just clean. It changes the chemistry of the surface itself, leaving behind a microscopic alkaline residue that functions as a passive, ongoing barrier against recolonization. No reapplication of expensive spray, no monthly retreatment cycle. The surface itself becomes inhospitable to mold. What makes this two-step method genuinely superior to most commercial alternatives is not one mechanism. It is the sequential combination of two opposing chemical environments, each addressing a different dimension of the mold problem. Step 1. Vinegar goes in acidic and kills what is already there. It penetrates the hyphae, destroys the cellular membranes of the existing colony, and breaks down the structural integrity of the organism at its roots. This is the offensive strike, eliminating the established problem. Step 2. Baking soda comes in alkaline and prevents what would come next. It neutralizes any remaining acidic residue, creates an environment hostile to new spore germination, and leaves a protective layer that continues working passively long after the cleaning session is over. This is the defensive position, holding the ground that was won. Note that the two compounds are applied sequentially, not simultaneously. Mixing vinegar and baking soda together produces a rapid acid-base reaction. The fizzing and bubbling familiar from school science experiments that neutralizes both compounds before either can do its intended work. The sequence matters. The separation matters. This is the detail that distinguishes the method from a kitchen experiment and makes it a legitimate cleaning protocol. Acid first, alkaline second. Allow each to work fully before applying the next. The result is a treated surface that has been attacked from both chemical directions, leaving mold nowhere to hide and no conditions in which to return. Everything discussed above would mean considerably less if the method came with a cost in terms of safety. But this is perhaps where the $3 solution most dramatically outperforms the commercial alternative. Consider what is typically inside a branded mold removal product: quaternary ammonium compounds, chlorine bleach derivatives, synthetic surfactants, artificial stabilizers, chemical fragrances to mask the underlying smell. These are not inherently evil compounds, but they carry real consequences. Respiratory irritation during application, toxic fumes in poorly ventilated spaces, chemical residues on surfaces that children touch and pets walk across, specific warnings about skin contact, eye exposure, and safe disposal. Read the back of any commercial mold spray carefully. The fine print tells a different story than the confident front label. Now consider the $3 alternative. White distilled vinegar is used in food preparation, consumed directly, and approved as a food-safe sanitizing agent in commercial kitchens. Its only meaningful side effect is a temporary smell that dissipates completely within minutes of drying. Baking soda is a food ingredient. It is used in toothpaste, antacids, and infant care products. Its safety profile is, in the most literal sense, edible. Together, these two compounds leave no toxic residue, produce no harmful fumes, require no ventilation warnings, and pose no meaningful risk to children who touch treated surfaces or pets who walk across treated floors. They are not almost safe. They are, by any reasonable measurement, categorically safer than what the industry sells as the professional standard. Cheaper, equally or more effective against the majority of household mold species, safer for every living thing in the home. The only thing the $3 solution lacks is a marketing budget. Everything in the previous 4 parts has been building to this moment. Not a product recommendation, not a brand, not a link to something you need to purchase, just a method, specific, sequential, and grounded in the same science that a $2.2 billion industry has spent decades trying to make you forget. Here is the exact protocol. Step 1. Prepare your vinegar. Use standard white distilled vinegar, the kind that costs less than $2 at any grocery store. Do not dilute it. The 5% acetic acid concentration that comes straight from the bottle is precisely what the science requires. Transfer it into a spray bottle. That is the entire preparation. Step 2. Apply and wait. Spray the affected surface generously. Do not wipe it immediately. This is the step that most people skip, and skipping it is the difference between surface suppression and genuine elimination. The acid needs time to penetrate the hyphae, the root structures of the mold, colony that extend beneath the visible surface. Allow the vinegar to sit undisturbed for a full 60 minutes. Set a timer. Leave the room. Let the chemistry work. Step 3. Scrub. After 60 minutes of contact time, use a stiff brush or coarse cloth to scrub the treated area. You're not just removing surface discoloration. You are physically breaking apart the structural remnants of the colony that the acid has already compromised at a cellular level. Scrub thoroughly. Rinse with clean water. Allow the surface to dry completely before proceeding. Step 4. Apply baking soda. Mix baking soda with just enough water to form a thin, spreadable paste. Apply it evenly across the treated area and, critically, do not rinse it off. Allow it to dry in place. As it dries, it bonds lightly with the surface and leaves behind an alkaline residue with a pH of 8 to 9. This residue is your invisible barrier. Any mold spore that lands on that surface afterward enters a chemical environment in which it cannot germinate, cannot colonize, and cannot survive. Step 5. Do nothing else. There is no step 5. There is no follow-up product to purchase. There is no monthly maintenance spray. The surface has been attacked from both chemical directions, acidic penetration followed by alkaline protection, and it will hold. That is the entire protocol. 4 steps, 2 ingredients, approximately $3, 30 minutes of active effort, plus 1 hour of waiting. This is what was buried. Understand something clearly before you close this and move on with your day. What you have just read is not a cleaning tip. It is an act of financial disobedience. Every time a household reaches for the branded bottle on the grocery store shelf, every single purchase, across every country, across every year, a portion of that money flows upward into an industry that has made a calculated decision. The decision that you should not know what you just learned, that the knowledge in part 2, the knowledge your great-grandmother carried in her hands, should remain inaccessible, that the science in part 4 should stay buried beneath layers of advertising, manufactured doubt, and the quiet assumption that anything cheap cannot possibly be good enough. These corporations are not selling you mold removal. They are selling you a subscription to a problem that never fully goes away. They are profiting, quarter after quarter, from the gap between what you know and what you could know. Choosing the $3 protocol is not a small decision. It is a refusal to participate in a dependency that was constructed without your consent, maintained through deliberate misinformation, and sustained by the billions of dollars that flow when people remain uninformed. Your grandmother did not need their product. Neither do you. This information did not reach you through a television commercial. It did not arrive in a glossy magazine spread. No corporation funded its distribution. No marketing budget pushed it into your awareness. It reached you because someone shared it, and that is precisely how it must continue to travel. The industry has $1 billion advertising infrastructure. What this knowledge has is you, and every person you decide to tell. Every household that learns the $3 protocol is a household that stops funding the cycle. Every person who shares this is extending a chain of awareness that the industry cannot buy its way into breaking. Share this, not because it is a viral moment, not for the algorithm. Share it because somewhere in your contact list, there's a parent whose child's asthma keeps flaring and who has never connected it to the patch on the bathroom wall. There is someone spending $30 every few months on a bottle that keeps failing them. There is someone who is tired and congested and vaguely unwell and has no idea that the answer to part of their suffering is sitting in their kitchen cabinet right now. The forbidden knowledge is only forbidden when it stays silent. Every share is a small act of resistance against an information monopoly that has run largely unchallenged for 70 years. Give it a voice. There is a principle that the commercial cleaning industry understands better than almost any other sector, a principle so fundamental to its business model that the entire structure collapses without it. Effective and cheap cannot coexist profitably. If something works, and everyone knows it works, and it costs almost nothing, then no one can build a $2.2 billion industry around it. The profitability requires the effectiveness to be hidden, doubted, or forgotten. It requires the cheap solution to seem primitive. It requires you to feel uncertain about your own pantry. That uncertainty was manufactured. That doubt was purchased. And the moment you see it clearly, the moment you understand that the feeling of inadequacy you have been sold about your grandmother's methods was an advertising strategy, not a scientific conclusion, it loses its power over you entirely. The truth about mold is not complicated. It is not technical. It does not require a chemistry degree or a professional license or a $30 bottle with a confident label. It requires vinegar. It requires baking soda. It requires 60 minutes of patience and the willingness to trust what the science, the history, and the kitchen cabinet have all been quietly confirming for over a century. You were never missing the solution. You were only missing the permission to believe it was real. Now you have it.